You're listening to the already canceled podcast.
I got a bad feeling about this.
We have some bad hombres here, and we're going to get them out.
Slap some bacon on a biscuit and let's go.
Let's put a smile on that face.
These allegations are false.
What's your profanity?
Do I look like I know what a JPEG is?
What is up, Homo sapiens, and welcome to the Already Canceled podcast, where we rant about social issues from our Christian perspective and look deep at life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. My name is John, and I'm joined today by my esteemed co-host, Nathan.
Hi, John. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm very busy, but other than that, doing well.
Alrighty. Well, why don't you run us through a list of what we're going to talk about on the show today?
So today we're going to talk about something a little different from last week, but yet some similarities. So first, we're going to talk about Kanye West and what's going on with him, whether good, bad,
Good, bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, exactly. And we're also going to talk about some of the judicial hearings that have been happening on Monday, the 12th, and today, which is the 13th, Tuesday of October, for Amy Coney Barrett. And then we're going to jump right into the VP debate with a unique perspective. And last but not least, we'll give you a little sneak peek of what we might talk about next week. All holes barred, nothing crazy happens.
That's right. It'll be exciting. So like you said, jumping in with Kanye West, he's still running for president. I don't know if that surprises anybody or not.
He's trying to be a write-in candidate in a lot of states.
And it looks like, if you read his Twitter, it looks like he's been somewhat successful at that. But also, if you go back and scroll through his Twitter a little more, one thing of note is he released a new campaign ad. And I know we both watched it, but Nathan, I wanted to get your thoughts on that a little bit.
So I think it was very good. I think it was an awesome ad and one of the best uplifting ads I've seen for a presidential candidate. It wasn't so much of an attack, but the problem was it really had a lot of Christian values and moral values, but not a whole lot of policy points or issues in it, which I feel like this is an ad you would introduce at the beginning of your campaign to kind of set the precedent, set the stage, not like less than a month from the election.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It was a very uplifting ad, very positive messaging, very just like encouraging and kind of builds your faith in the, human effort again. It wasn't a negative ad about, my opponent, does this or that, and they've taken $1,000 in taxpayer money and whatnot. So it's definitely very uplifting and encouraging.
And it also, I think, was one that was specific, almost, I don't think it's totally, was targeted toward the African-American population. Now, of course, he is an African-American, so I understand where he's coming from, and realistically, I think it would be good for the African-American population to break away from the Democratic Party and see moral issues as something that is a problem in their community. Now, let's not kid ourselves. It's an issue in all of our communities, not just that one.
Mm-hmm.
The only difference is it just appears to be it appears to be a bigger issue in that community because of, and I'll preface this, the media and what they would like us to believe versus the reality of it, of we all have this in nature.
Yeah, and one of those moral issues that Kanye's been very outspoken of as of late would be abortion. Just yesterday, he had another tweet about that. Nathan, do you want to read that for us?
Yeah, he posted this, or what I guess tweeted is the proper word for this, at 10:49 in the morning, saying, "Black babies' lives matter." Try saying that 10 times fast. And then 1,000 black children are aborted daily, and then some like amazed eyes emoji.
Yeah, and so I think that echoes some of what Kanye's been saying in the past few months. He came out against Planned Parenthood on his podcast, or on Nick Cannon's podcast, talking about the genocide of black children. He's also opened up about how he was almost aborted and how he almost aborted his daughter. And so it's very interesting seeing someone of such high profile talking about this issue in the media, because it's not something that gets discussed really at all, other than pro-life versus pro-choice.
And I'd like to see what your thoughts are on the future of Kanye. So I really, really don't think he has a chance in the presidential election. You'd agree, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a joke. It's a publicity stunt. I mean, I think he's probably serious, but I don't think he stands a chance.
Now, do you think he and of course we're all hypotheticals here, but do you think he'll take this and with the 4 years of whoever's left, we all hope it's the conservative option and the one that stands for more biblical values than the other, obviously, and AKA that at this time is the President of the United States and Mike Pence. But do you think he'll start gearing towards becoming president, or do you think he'll try to become the next like evangelist or outreacher, is a wrong word, but like someone who goes into communities and says, cities, and say, we need to change?
I don't know. I think that's an interesting thought process there and an interesting option. Personally, I think Kanye is serious about this. I think he thinks he can become president. I think he has, quote, very similar to Donald Trump, saying he doesn't do anything to lose. That being said, sorry, you're probably going to lose this. But I think it's definitely an interesting learning curve, and I think he's been trying to make more of an impact ever since he proclaimed came out as a Christian last fall-ish. He came out with his first gospel album, which was fairly good. He's been hosting these Sunday services. Love or hate Kanye, they're very cool to see. I mean, he's also charging an arm and a leg for them, but that's because he's
charging
Kanye.
For the service?
I'm pretty sure.
Oh,
I mean, it's Kanye. He's still got an ego.
That's kind of, I don't know, hypocritical, I guess. You're charging people to come to church. What?
Yeah, well, the Christians have done worse.
Yeah,
so.
well, that's true.
But I think it's interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if he did start to make a run as like an evangelist or whatnot. I don't think he's ready for it, though.
I think he's still, and I don't know how to quite put this, but I feel like he started on the train of an evangelist, a Christian, and he's taken the full force of Kanye with it, which is the typical, I tweet a lot, I say things sometimes that are a little crazy. But the problem with it is he doesn't, as a young Christian, there's nothing wrong with sharing the gospel, and you should be excited about your faith at all times, right? But at the same time, should you start dumping into real deep topics that, or pretend you come from a position of not authority, because that's the wrong word for it, but like understanding, like you've started to really study scripture to speak on a platform to others, and I think there's nothing wrong with it, but I think he's got a long way to go to spiritually mature, and he's jumping so fast into this. Hopefully you never burn out. You shouldn't burn out as a Christian. If you're burnt out, you're doing something wrong. But
yeah, I would agree.
You get my drift.
I would agree. I think, even personally, after, being a Christian since I was very young, I don't feel like I would be equipped to step into that sort of role as a mainstream, Christian leader that Kanye is moving into. But if we dive into the Bible and look back, the Apostle Paul spent 3 years in the desert studying and preparing before he actually started his public ministry. I think that shows a lot of, it's not easy. It's not something to jump into lightly. And the Bible talks about how those who have leadership positions will be held to a higher standard and will be more responsible because you have the chance of leading people astray. And so I don't think it's something to take lightly.
Well, and when God says you're held to a higher standard, you should kind of take that seriously.
Definitely. Talking about higher standards.
Oh, yeah.
Moving into the judicial hearings, they're currently... what's the word here?
They're questioning her /
Yeah, they're questioning Amy Coney Barrett, Trump's nominee for the Supreme Court. And I think it's been very interesting. Yesterday they had the opening statements, which...
30 minutes for each senator, give or take. And they basically said some of them, especially there's one, Cory Booker, really perturbed me by something he said. And a lot of them had these false attacks of, she's going to take away Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, and we're all going to be without health care, and woe is me. But she hasn't technically ruled on that. And technically speaking, even the Republicans in the committee said, no, whether or not it ends up this way, it's what they said, okay, that they don't want to take away health care from those who have pre-existing conditions. That's something they don't want to do. But what disturbed me was the fact that he said, I'm not going to vote for you. I don't think, just point blank, just so you know. And the thing is that, to me, if you're there to confirm a Supreme Court justice who has been appointed by the president, at least give them, or pretend to give them, okay, a fair shake, then say at the end if you have a chance to.
Yeah, and I think that's really true. I think a lot of them have already come in with their minds, decided one way or the other, which I think if you have your mind decided, for the person, I don't think that's bad, but I think you should be willing to, not overlook any glaring problems with them. But if you come in saying that they're bad and that you're not going to approve no matter what, that's kind of an issue.
Well, and I think, everybody should be given a fair shake. And whether or not you already have your preconceived notions or how you're going to vote on that person already in your head, that's fine. And that's normal in politics in this day and age, and probably has been for, centuries. But you can at least play politics. You can at least pretend you're not. At least give the impression to your voter base, I'm doing my civic duty, blah, 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 right?
Yeah, I think you kind of leaned into this a little bit already, but one of the big problems that I've seen, throughout the first 2 days of these judicial hearings has been logical fallacies. And that's something we're going to kind of dig into for the rest of the show today, is just like these logical fallacies. And the big one that I was seeing out of them was really, I think, the straw man argument kind of mixed a little bit with a red herring. And to break that down, the straw man argument is just creating this false idea of the opponent's argument so you can more easily knock it down. And the red herring, on the other hand, being something to distract from the main topic at hand. And so throughout this, the Democrats' main opposition to Amy Coney Barrett has been that if they appoint her, they're going to overturn the Affordable Care Act, and all of these Americans are going to be without health care. And they've all brought up, this story of this is Sally. She's 11. She lives in Nevada, and she was born with a congenital heart defect, and her family has accumulated over $500,000 in hospital bills.
And the Affordable Care Act is the only way she can receive care. And
so first of all, that's an appeal to emotion.
It's a tragic story.
It's a tragic story. It's also slightly a red herring that has nothing to do with the Supreme Court nominee sitting in front of you.
Well, I'll quickly define. A red herring is typically related to the issue in question, but isn't quite relevant enough to be helpful. And instead of clarifying and focusing, it confuses and distracts. So that's basically the gist of it.
Yeah, and that's really what they're doing, is they're pulling in these issues that have no relevance to
the confirmation
of the Supreme Court nominee,
yeah.
But also they totally are disregarding what the Supreme Court actually does. And she has stated numerous times throughout these past few days that she cannot give an opinion on something that has not come before her in court. She will not, state how she would rule if something hypothetically were to come up, and that it's not the Supreme Court's job to overturn something. It's their job to rule on any cases that come before them. So if a case about the Affordable Care Act came before the Supreme Court, then they would hear all of the rules and the cases and the laws and the people, for and against, and then they would make a ruling. But they can't just suddenly, we have a new appointee to the Supreme Court. Let's overturn the Affordable Care Act. Let's overturn Roe v. Wade. And that's something that everybody's talking about, but these things can't be overturned until something comes before the court with that in mind.
And there was an interesting point brought up by Josh Hawley today, who's the senator from Missouri, and he talked about, and I think it was talked about by another senator, and he just revisited the issue of that after church one day, she signed something. The priest was asking everyone to sign it if they feel strongly about it, saying that I, decry or denounce abortion and I am pro-life. And it was by the event was held or put together by, and they had a table at the end of the sanctuary or church there, and it was talking about by it was either the county or that state's Right for Life group that was putting it kind of on. I had the organization together for that. And she said, well, I was doing that in my private capacity before I became a public servant. And now that I'm a public servant, that does not reflect on my views because I need to have a specific court case brought up and I need to see the basically precedent set in order to figure out how to vote on it. Now, the interesting thing about that, and I want to bring that up, is when it comes to precedent in the Supreme Court, as the Supreme Court, you're not held to the same precedent standards, and some would argue this point, but as the circuit court, which is below that. Okay, so there's 7th Circuit, which is what she currently serves on, and on and on and on. But what I'm getting at is, in the Supreme Court, you can potentially overturn a previous precedent. That to me is interesting, and the whole pro-life question was interesting, but I also feel like when they're interviewing her for the judgeship position, it's great, but it's almost as if she's not even human because she can't respond. As a person, she can't respond. And to me, that bugs me, but I know it's the way it's supposed to be, so.
Yeah, and I've found it kind of frustrating today because they kept asking her the same question, and she kept telling them, I can't give you a legal opinion on this, first of all, because I don't have all the facts, but also because it's just not proper, and even, former judges have said that, set that precedent of not, stating how I would rule on a certain case if it came before the court. So it was frustrating to see. I don't know. It was just very weird.
And I think along those lines, the logical fallacies, the red herrings, and realistically, the hasty generalizations, circular arguments, all that stuff really comes down to what happened in the vice presidential debate. But surprisingly, while both candidates kind of took part in that,
it really came down to the moderator. So this was the vice presidential debate last week. I don't remember the day, between Vice President Mike Pence and vice presidential candidate Kamala Harris. And it was moderated by Susan Page, who works for, I think she's an editor for like USA Today or something, which was a little strange to me, but that's all right. Digging into it though, I'll ask your opinion in a second, Nathan, but I found it definitely more of an engaging debate than the first one between the presidential candidates. As we already kind of alluded to, I think there was a lot of logical fallacies in this one. It wasn't nearly as crazy as the first. I think it was much more of a well-rounded debate. But again, I don't know. We'll dig into some of the questions first. But Nathan, what was your general thoughts on it?
So I just wanted to touch on real quick. Yes, she is the Washington bureau chief for the USA Today. So okay. Washington, awesome. D.C. Yeah, and she's actually covered 6 White House administrations and 10 presidential elections and interviewed 9 presidents. So she's got quite a resume behind her name. Now, as far as unbiased, they shouldn't even pretend that they are. I think the vice president debate overall, though, went really well. Now, everything can always be better, okay? There's certain points in it that could have been better. There's things we're going to touch on today that we think could have been better, should have been better. But overall, compared to the first debate, hands down, was way better. Both candidates tried to present arguments. I will say Mike Pence won that debate. I feel comfortable saying that. I would agree. And he really did blow it out of the park. I feel like Kamala tried this sassy 8th grader schoolgirl approach with a lot of things and just was very condescending. And then the media immediately jumped on that and said, he's white-splaining to her, or mansplaining, that's the word, sorry. Yeah, mansplaining to her. I'm sorry. Is it not fair for a man to say anything when you're supposed to be debating someone?
The problem that Mike Pence ran up against, and I could tell, starting out, he really wanted to not be like Donald Trump the previous week. He really wanted to not talk over her. He didn't want to interrupt. But what he ran into, and I could see the frustration, is every turn she took, she was lying, flat out, just making up facts.
Oh, bold-faced lies.
And he tried to keep himself composed. He did a great job of that, by the way. But he tried not to interrupt her. But when someone just keeps lying left, right, and center, eventually you can't hold it in anymore. And you just have to be like, you're lying!
Well, and there was a point where he said that she goes, well, I'm talking, and got all sassy with him. And he said, well, the point is something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing here massively. So, well, the point is, are you telling the truth, or the truth, right? Like he finally just addressed it, the elephant in the room, and said, it'd be nice if you started telling the truth.
Yeah, I remember he said, you're entitled to your opinions, but not to your facts.
Oh, that was great.
That was great. I think Mike Pence had some very good points. He did have a couple zingers, but I think those didn't land very well just because of the way Mike Pence presents himself. He's very calm, cool, collected. He speaks very, I wouldn't say monotone, but he didn't raise his voice at all. And so because of his delivery, I think any, good zingers that he had didn't really land, which is unfortunate. But, I mean, again, I don't know that anyone's opinions were going to be changed out of this debate either.
Yeah. Although I will say, if you were to look at this debate and critically think about it as an independent, if they even exist, I would say Mike Pence did a stronger showing. And if you were just to take the demeanor of the people in the debate, Mike Pence was a gentleman.
Yeah.
And Kamala was, like I said, an 8th grader schoolgirl who was just, I hate to use this word, but it was so, if you just watch it, is bratty. She was just bratty.
Yeah.
It's like, what in the world do you have to gain by this?
Yeah, it was an interesting thing to watch. But let's dive into some of these questions first. I couldn't help myself. The very first question out of Susan Page's mouth had me yelling at the TV. Their first topic was on the pandemic. She started out like this, and I quote, "Senator Harris, the coronavirus is not under control." I stopped right there and I yelled, that is a loaded question.
Yeah.
That's a false assumption, because not everybody would agree that the coronavirus is not under control.
Well, I hate to say it, and I really wish it wasn't this way, but it just is, and it's the facts of it. The flu has been around, and the flu is a virus. Influenza is a form of a virus. It changes every year. They try to gauge for it when they go to Australia to create the vaccine for the United States, and vice versa, because that's how it travels. Winter time is different. Opposite.
Yeah.
Anyway, and we have a vaccine for it, but I hate to tell you, we still get the flu. So the whole idea that, it's ever going to be fully under control, it's not a realistic
It's
statement.
unfortunate. And I think there might be some truth to the idea that it is not under control, but it's like the forest fires, those aren't under control either. I just thought it shows where she's coming from a biased perspective, loading the questions. Going into that, though, she asked what would the Biden administration do in January and February that a Trump administration wouldn't do. Well, first of all, that's also making an assumption of what we think the Trump administration would do, which you can't honestly say. I think Kamala then went into explaining a plan and yada, yada, yada. And then Mike Pence came back and he said, that sounds a lot like what the Trump administration has done. And it almost sounds like plagiarism, which is a thing or two that Joe Biden would know about.
Well, and that's the funny thing is he did mention, we shut down flights, we did what we could, and yet Joe Biden came out at the time and said, you're a horrible person, you're racist, and all this jazz.
Yeah, homophobic.
Yeah, right. But it had nothing to do with that. It was a matter of trying to protect Americans, and they didn't really know what they were doing because it had never happened before.
That's why it's a novel virus.
Yeah.
Nobody knows anything about it.
But yeah, Susan Page, she also interrupted several times the president, but it felt, if you watched carefully, it felt like she interrupted the vice president a lot. Now, maybe he talked over a lot, but yet didn't butt in as much when Kamala Harris was going over. I noticed that at the end, real prominent. But it's, and this is something, one of the questions she had earlier on, she said, and she's asking Kamala Harris this question, do voters have a right to know more detailed health information about presidential candidates and especially about presidents, especially when they're facing some kind of challenge? So it's a, let me say this and repeat it and then say there's a challenge. Well, okay, which presidential candidate just faced a health challenge?
Well, Donald Trump just came down with coronavirus and kicked its butt.
Yeah. I mean, Biden might have dementia, but that's not like a huge...
I think, yeah, it was definitely interesting. They talked about the president's age, and she asked, let me see here. She asked if they discussed any safeguards or procedures when it comes to the issue of presidential disability. Now, I'm not really sure what that question is supposed to really be asking. I guess they're asking, have you discussed with your president or with your candidate at what point, you think they might be unfit to serve and how you would, take over that power or whatever. I don't know.
I felt like that question was loaded in the sense of saying, if he's not fit to serve, then what are your personal thoughts on how you're going to take over?
Yeah, and she prefaced that question by stating how with either candidate who wins this fall, either one of them will be the oldest president to serve, with President Trump being 74 and Joe Biden being 78. That's pretty old, but I don't think it was a garbage question, really. Like,
did you hear the one where she said if Donald Trump was to lose, is that how if he was to lose and not accept the results,
how would they take care of that?
Yeah, and Vice President Pence, how would you personally handle that? There was something like that. How would you personally go about that challenge?
That's also another straw man argument, setting up this idea that Trump is not going to peacefully hand over power, which is also something that came up in the judicial hearings multiple times today. It's this false idea that Trump has said that he's not going to peacefully hand over power. Trump didn't say that.
Trump's never even cared about it. The problem is with that question originally is if Mike Pence answered it, straight up answered the question, he would be admitting by default that the president would refuse to leave.
It's a loaded question.
Yeah.
It's, Nathan, have you stopped beating your wife? If you say yes, then you're admitting that you've been beating your wife. If you say no, you're admitting that you haven't stopped beating your wife.
Yeah.
By answering the question in the way that it's asked, it's admitting guilt.
Now, let's just preface that. I don't do that. But
Nathan does not do that. Nathan is a very loving husband.
But no, but then, for example, she says, when she's asking Mike Pence about the economic recovery and all that, she's like, I'll go a sentence into the question, should Americans be braced for an economic comeback that is going to take not months, but a year or more? You have 2 minutes to answer uninterrupted. Well, the problem with that question is she's saying, I'm going to tell you that it's just not going to take months. It's going to take years to recover.
Yeah, that's the underlying assumption that she's trying to push. And it's, again, she's not asking fair and balanced questions. She's putting her own agenda into these questions.
Well, and it really boils down to, I feel like, and John and I were talking about this offhand, that there should be two people on the moderator stand. One is a Democrat, maybe reporter or whatever, and one is a Republican reporter or whatever. Someone who leans more conservative, someone who leans more left. Doesn't necessarily have to be conservative or Republican or Democrat. But they both get to ask questions, same question to both candidates. You can't word it a little differently. It's the same question. And what I think by that is, the reason I say that is then we know they're biased. We know they're biased, right? Because the problem is we get these people who say, oh, I'm unbiased. And then they ask these questions.
My name's Chris Wallace. I'm unbiased.
Yeah. And then you watch the debate and you're like, what? No.
Yeah, I would agree.
Because maybe that question on economic recovery could be, how do you plan? What is the plan for your administration or your future administration to confront the economic trouble coronavirus has caused us?
That's a great question.
Period.
I would be happy with that question, but no, that's not what they ask.
Yeah.
Another question that I thought Kamala answered interestingly, Susan Page asked about the vaccine that the Trump administration has been working on. And Kamala Harris said, if public health professionals, and I quote, if Dr. Fauci, if the doctors tell us we should take it, I'll be the first in line to take it, absolutely. But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it. What in the world?
It's like, okay, so if what about both?
What if they both tell you should take it, Kamala?
What if your favorite doctor in the world, Dr. Fauci, says, yes, it's safe, just like he said it's safe to vote in person, but yet, somehow that gets brushed over, huh?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Continuing on, talking about health again, Susan Page stated this. She said, President Trump's doctors have given misleading answers or refused to answer basic questions about his health. Citation needed on that. That's, again, a talking point of the left. That was a big news article in CNN last weekend when Trump went to Walter Reed Hospital. They were all over the place. They honestly thought he died. That's what
the media or the doctors?
Yeah, the media.
Okay.
They, trying to look up how he was doing, you couldn't find anything because they were saying, oh, it's all misleading. But if you actually go back and listen to it, that's not true.
Well, I actually listened to it live. It was live. The press briefing from the doctors, the second day, it was a Saturday, so I don't know when that exactly was. I think it was the second day he was in the hospital or whatever. They all came out, a whole bunch of doctors, and said, this is what I think the president's doing, and so on and so forth. And I didn't get any indication he was doing horrible by watching that.
No, there was nothing misleading about it. The only thing misleading was that question with some false assumptions at the beginning.
Well, and then she went on in that question and said, and my question to each of you in turn is this information voters deserve to know? Well, first off, the first original question, like you stated, John, is a bomb question. It's a loaded question. So if they answered it, it's like you're admitting,
dude, the American voters deserve to know these fake facts that I just made up. Anyway, moving on to talking about the Supreme Court. We already talked about the judicial hearings, but they also brought up the Supreme Court during the vice presidential debate. She said that the court's conservative majority, the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett, would submit the court's conservative majority and likely open it to more abortion restrictions or even overturn the landmark Roe v. Wade ruling. Well, first of all, that's a straw man built into a slippery slope fallacy, because it's saying that if Amy Coney Barrett was nominated and supported and approved, it would boost the conservative majority, which would likely open it up to more abortion restrictions, which could even lead to the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Whoa. That's like 5 steps from confirming Amy Coney Barrett to overturning Roe v. Wade, which I don't think is, anywhere close on the horizon, unfortunately.
Well, first off, they can't just go jumping into Roe v. Wade to overturn it. They have to have something brought before the court, and the court has to accept the case.
No duh. But that wasn't her question. Susan Page, a few sentences later, because all of these questions have to be, elaborate and built up, she said, if Roe v. Wade is overturned, what would you want your state to do? Addressing Mike Pence, she said, what would you want Indiana to do? What kind of question is that?
First off, if you're the vice president, let's say either one wins. If you're the vice president of the United States, you don't go advising your home state how to do things. That's for the governor and the legislature and the people of that state to decide.
She continued, would you want your home state to ban all abortions? Again, like you said, that's not for the vice president to advise their home state to do or not do. It's a garbage question.
And realistically, if Roe v. Wade potentially, and this is a topic we could delve into in future podcast series, if it was overturned and the cases that led up to it and so on, if that was totally overturned, what would happen? Well, as far as I'm aware, it would go back to the states, and that's why she's asking the particular question. But
she's not asking the question outright. What she's really asking is, what is your stance on abortion?
Mm-hmm.
That's the question that she's trying to ask in an underhanded and really kind of stupid way.
Well, and I love the fact that even though it took a while for Mike Pence to get to the question because he had to address something Kamala said earlier, he said, I am unapologetically pro-life. To me, that's the winner there.
That's all we needed from him.
Yeah.
And my other question about this question was, so she said at the beginning, so I want to move on to the next topic, which is the Supreme Court. Where she goes from the Supreme Court to a question about abortion, I don't really know. Those things don't really, like, it was a weird leap for me talking about, okay, we're talking about the Supreme Court next.
Maybe she should have brought up...
Abortion.
Yeah, and I think the biggest ticket item that she should have brought up with the Supreme Court was nothing like this. It was you're appointing a justice to... Your administration is appointing a justice to become a member of the Supreme Court, changing the historic precedent of a somewhat balanced court. I mean, somewhat, okay, to the first time of being conservative in a long time. And she didn't even have to name that, but say it would change the dynamic and makeup of the court. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was very left-leaning. If Trump appoints someone, of which he has, she's not going to be. And in this case, Amy's not going to be. So that would have been an appropriate question. Or even the question that Kamala refused to answer,
Which was, will you pack the court?
and that was not even asked by the moderator.
Mike Pence pressed Kamala Harris on that question. She did as her running mate and refused to answer. She danced around it. And Mike Pence, he let the people know straight up. He said, look, you've seen what she's done. She's refused to answer, and that is an answer in and of itself.
Yeah, he's like, I'd like this to stand for the record, which was a funny way of putting it, but I liked it.
Let the record show.
Let the record show. That's what it was. I thought that was a funny way of putting it, but it was good. The other interesting thing is she even said, I'm going to respond, real sassy like, and he goes,
I'll respond if you give me a second.
and she's like, all right, go ahead. And then she said, well, let me take you on a little history lesson. And she got all sassy.
Was that the history lesson, or was that where she talked about getting her call from Joe Biden? There was,
I don't know.
I think that was a different
she did,
one.
Well, okay. Well, either way, she didn't address the question.
She did not address the question.
She went on a bunny trail somewhere else and decided, oh, this is a great opportunity to just take things.
Now, to Mike Pence, he wasn't perfect either. They both played the political game of not answering the question or answering a different question that they wanted to answer, or going back to the previous topic. Like, okay, that's a good question, but I'd like to go back to the previous topic for a moment. So, I mean, he didn't have perfect marks, but... And
realistically, it is super hard to debate someone who cannot, and I mean cannot, tell the truth to save her life.
I agree.
Or even has a policy to stand on. If the person just says one thing and the next day has a different policy, how are you going to debate that person?
You can't. It's
like the questions about the Green New Deal. And she's saying, well, we don't do the Green New Deal. Well, you were a co-sponsor to that bill.
Like, you've supported it in the past. We had the Democratic debates, which was that earlier this year?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was a long time ago.
Right.
But we had the Democratic debates where they came out in support of that. And now, like, they can't stand on any policy issue, like we said in our last episode, because taking a stance would isolate one end or the other of their Democratic voters. So their only platform is, I hate Trump.
Or it's, let's ride the fence and never say anything. I mean, Joe Biden, just right after the debate, not long after, stated, a member of the press asked him, do the people deserve to know what your thoughts are on packing the court? And he goes, no, the people don't deserve to know, because whatever I say will become the headline of the day or something dumb. And there's a couple quips in there from two different times he was asked. But,
he said, no, the people don't deserve.
Yeah, he did. Overall, he said, no, the people don't deserve, outright.
Alrighty, Joe. Alrighty.
And you want him as your commander-in-chief. You want him to lead the country where he says, no, the people don't deserve to know.
No, I don't want him as my commander-in-chief.
Not at all.
I do not at all.
If you can't trust a man, or if you can't trust a man to at least tell you the truth, or just at least say what they're thinking. Okay, Trump may not always tell the truth occasionally. I mean, I don't think I have a too terrible of a problem, but if at least he tweets what he's believing, right? We all know where he's going from.
The last question I wanted to dig into, they talked about the justice system a little bit, and they talked about Breonna Taylor, which was the case of a African-American, I believe she was a former police officer, who was shot and killed in her apartment by the police officers when her boyfriend opened fired and shot at the police after they announced themselves for a warrant. Or
at least the police said they identified themselves.
There's a lot of
gray area.
There's a lot of facts and fake news floating around about this case. There was a lot of opinions, and people formed most of their opinions before the case was ever settled. The Louisville district attorney a few weeks ago came out and had a press conference, gave a briefing on the charges that were being held. They were holding charges against one officer for negligent firing into other apartments or whatnot, but the officers were not charged for the murder of Breonna Taylor.
It's because her boyfriend, I believe it was boyfriend, opened fire at the cops first.
Yeah, it was pure self-defense, and I don't know all the facts, but it was heard before a jury, and so a jury made their decision. They looked at all of the facts, which we don't know, and they made a decision. Well, then Susan Page in the debate said Senator Harris, in the case of Breonna Taylor, was justice done.
Well, first off, does either candidate know all of the facts on the case?
No, and I mean, she also posed the same question to Mike Pence, but the question, in the case of Breonna Taylor, was justice done? I'm sorry. What you're actually asking there is, do you trust the justice system or not? And what was made pretty clear is that obviously Susan Page doesn't, otherwise she wouldn't be asking the question. Now, I don't remember what Kamala Harris's full response was.
I don't either.
But pretty much no.
I mean, it really boils down to, and this is my problem, if you can destroy the credibility, and what they're, I feel like what all pundits, Democrat, Republican, so on, it's destroy the credibility of a certain branch of government because these persons are in there, like Democrats or Republicans or whatever name game. The problem with this is if you destroy the integrity of a branch of government by one, either acting like fools in that branch, aka the legislature, or two, just discrediting it like the judicial and the media is trying to do, by asking that question, you're saying, effectively, the judicial system of this country is so broken and so corrupt, it's not going to serve justice for African Americans or anyone.
And therefore, we have to demolish it, tear it down, defund it, and rebuild the system. And that truly is the agenda that they're trying to do, and it's frightening.
It's bad. Real bad.
The America that we know and love is trying to be systematically torn apart, but it's brilliant. It's a brilliant plan. It's devious. It's devilish.
Man, it's a long-term goal you've seen the media play for years. I mean, you saw them play it under the Obama administration and even before then. So I think we're just now seeing it almost for its true colors. If you haven't seen it yet, you're not really looking or really paying attention to politics and not looking at what they're really trying to achieve, which is discrediting the system. You know, all these Democrats tear down the system. Well, the system is made up of people you vote for.
Yeah.
Which, considering people you vote for, there is an election coming up for the president of this country, and it'll be Biden or Trump.
We're less than 3 weeks away from it.
And we're going to go over, this is the sneak preview.
I take that back. We're exactly 3 weeks away from it.
Exactly 3 weeks.
Pardon me. By the time you're listening to this, we're less than 3 weeks away from it.
Yeah. And our sneak preview, which pending nothing crazy happens in the next,
pending
couple
no
days.
acts of God.
Yeah, right. Will be a breakdown of the agenda in short form of the two candidates, Trump versus Biden, and what they plan to do for their term.
Yes, we're gonna look at just kind of what they've said that they want to do, what they've publicly stated or not stated. We know that about a month or two ago, President Trump released his agenda for his next term.
We're going to do our best to find Biden's. I'm sure there's some stuff on his website.
There has
I know
to be stuff out there. I mean, he's been pretty vague though. So we'll do some research. We'll dig into that with you guys next week. But until then,
subscribe, share with your friends, and thank you for listening to the
Already Canceled podcast.
Fellas, you have got what appears to be a dynamite sound.
I can't believe you've done this.
Thank you for your patronage.
I'll be back.
Oh, that's hot.
Not a single thing he said is accurate.
Bye!